Thank you, Martha. It's really an honor to be here. And I see so many friends out here, people that I've gotten to know over the years of traveling, and so many people that are working hard in this field. It's really a wonderful day. When I was asked to do this presentation, I was asked to do something different. And on my tag, I have troublemaker. Okay? So I'm going to do something a little bit different. I took a lot of time to reflect on what I've learned over the years of the ACE study and what it means to me, and that's changed over time. And I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the sciences that are engaged in the ACE study. And I originally talked about saying that the sciences collided, when the ACE study was done, but now I really think that what the ACE study does is that it unifies sciences, multiple sciences. And one of those sciences that I've started to look into in the last few years is the science of philosophy. And the science of philosophy antedates the sciences that we look at today. They were the origins of modern sciences. And part of the philosophy of human nature, really, we're studying human nature when we're looking at adversity, is that it tells us that human beings are built for love. That's what we're built to do. We're built to love each other. And we have minds that seek the truth. And one of the things that I think gets violated when children are exposed to toxic stress is they don't learn how to love, or they don't know what love is, or they get distorted aspects of love. And their minds are seeking the truth. And they learn to think in ways that aren't right. And so when I think of childhood adversity, I think of how human nature gets violated. We talk a lot about the biologic nature of adversity, of the genomics and the sequential neurodevelopment, but I now think of these other, even perhaps more damaging effects of what ACEs do. And Buddha said that the first noble truth is that all people have one thing in common. If they look about their own life or look at the world around them, they will see that life is full of suffering. And this is one of the first things that I learned doing the ACE study. I mean, I knew there was suffering out there, but I had no idea how much suffering there was in the children in our country and the children now around the world as this type of study is being done in many different environments. And one of the things that happens, I think, when children suffer is they tend to suffer without meaning. They don't understand what's happening to them. And to suffer without meaning is a kind of hell. And our job in doing this work is to help them to find meaning in what they've experienced so that they can understand their own lives and find perspective in their suffering, and to take responsibility so that they can take responsibility for changing their own lives, and also to find purpose, because people need meaning and purpose in their lives, and in finding purpose of healing themselves and their families and the people around them, and interrupting the intergenerational cycle of the transmission of toxic stress. And there's a paradox in all of this, and that's that the human heart is on a quest for happiness. And I believe that quest is a spiritual quest. And in a few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about the various ways that happiness is defined. In our secular culture, it's defined one way, and I think that our secular culture defines happiness in ways that are really distorted. And those distortions are the ways that people try to seek happiness when they've been faced with adversity. Hope. So, we're talking about love today. Other people are going to talk about love and truth and hope and all these things that keep us going. And in the mid-1980s, I was studying cardiovascular disease, and I happened to be going by the TV in the morning before I was going to work. And I don't watch morning TV shows. I think it was Good Morning America or something that was on. And there was someone there talking about the biology of hope. And I didn't really listen to the whole thing, but I went into work that day and I said, maybe it's kind of a weird thing. Maybe there is a biology involved in human hope. And since we were studying cardiovascular disease, what we did is we had national data on hope. And here what you see on this graph on the vertical axis is the incidence of dying from heart attacks, fatal heart disease. And across the bottom is the level of hopelessness that people reported. This was more than 10,000 randomly selected US adults, followed for more than 10 years. And as their level of hopelessness increased across the bottom from none to a little to some, quite a bit, very much, and extreme to almost giving up, you see a stepwise increase in people dying from heart attacks. And we tried with all our multivariate statistics to make that go away. Okay? We controlled for all the cardiovascular risk factors, all the things that you can think of, and there is an independent effect of hope or lack thereof on the human heart and in terms of fatal heart disease. Now, it was about that time we were thinking about the emotional aspects of disease, the emotional aspects of behavior, that I met Dr. Vince Folletti, and he came to the CDC and did a brown bag seminar and talked about his findings relating childhood sexual abuse to obesity in his obesity clinic. And I really didn't know what to think of that or what to make of that. I was sort of maybe unconsciously or vaguely intrigued about what we'd learned about emotion and disease and emotion and behavior. And Vince and I became friends and spent a fair amount of time together, and I traveled back and forth to San Diego talking about child abuse, talking about the medical aspects of abuse and neglect and violence. And over a period of about 3 or 4 years, we put together the ACE study. And what did the ACE study do? And what the ACE study really did is it incorporated facets of multiple science into its design. In terms of the types of adversity, we borrowed from the fields of sociology, psychology, criminology, psychiatry, medicine, public health, and others. We borrowed from the work of extraordinary researchers like David Finkelhor and Maurice Strauss, and Gail Wyatt, and others to put together the kind of questions that were necessary to ask about childhood adversity. And in terms of the outcomes, we tried to look at really broad aspects of the many ways that adversity could influence people, the social aspects, the psychological aspects, and the disease aspects. And so what we did is, we designed this study well. That's the one thing that we consciously did, is we designed it well. We really didn't know what we were going to find. And at the bottom, you'll see that what we found in doing this study is that ACEs are intergenerationally transmitted. And I think that's incredibly important because in terms of public health and interrupting the cycle, that's where we need to go, because this is person-to-person transmission. What's the power of the ACE study? I thought about this a lot, and over the years have come to believe that the power of the ACE study is it's simple. The results are profound, but the study itself is simple. I've never, I spent many years torturing databases until they confessed before I got this one. But this data, the voices of the 17,000 people in this study spoke, and it jumped right out. You don't have to be a genius to analyze this data and see what it shows. And we found, number one, that ACEs are common. They're terribly common, that they're highly interrelated. Where there's one type of adversity, there tends to be another. And that if you count them up, add them up, which is what we now know as the ACE score, that they have a cumulative impact on disease risk and social problems and family and relationship problems. And we also found, because ACEs are common and they're strongly related to so many things, that they account for a large percentage of health and social problems, a really large percentage of some of the most important health and social problems. And now what we have to back up the epidemiologic observations is we have all this biologic plausibility piling up, the neurosciences, genomics, immunology, and other studies showing the biologic aspects of adverse childhood experiences. The other simple thing about the ACE study that I've discovered over the past 10 years of traveling and speaking about this is the simplicity of it. It's easy to teach. This is really, I teach lay audiences, professional audiences, I go to libraries, and wherever I go, I get the sense that most people really can understand these concepts and take them away and perhaps bring meaning and purpose into their own lives. And it gives a common language. When we came up with the term adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, we did it because we wanted to have a cool name for the study that somebody would remember. And it turns out that it's a language that people can talk about. They can talk about their ACEs, and people talk about their ACE scores, and they don't have to talk about the actual sort of personal kinds of experiences that they had. And the conceptual framework around this is really easy to convey. People can understand that stress piles up in their lives, and when they know a little bit about the biology of stress, that it makes sense to them that certain things can happen in their lives, whether it's health problems or social problems or relationship problems. So the beauty of it is the simplicity. This is a slide that I borrowed from Dr. Frank Putnam, who's one of my heroes. He presented this slide a couple of years ago at the annual meeting of the Academy of Violence and Abuse. And what he said is, ACEs change the landscape. They provide a compelling tabulation of childhood adversity that directly related to easily understood and costly outcomes. They're largely responsible for increased awareness of policymakers of the role of childhood trauma in costly medical, psychiatric, and social problems. And they legitimized and stimulated interest in childhood adversities for researchers in a range of fields, many fields. We brought many fields together in the design, and now researchers from multiple fields. Everywhere we look, educators, policymakers, wherever you look, people are using this kind of framework and way of measuring things and finding that ACEs affect their mission and the people that they're trying to serve. Our first publication out of the ACE study in 1998 was something that looked at what we called the leading causes of death. And what we found was that ACEs increased the risk of heart and lung disease, stroke, diabetes, cancer, liver disease, suicide, injuries, HIV, and STDs. And for a while, because of my medical and public health background, I thought this was a medical problem. I don't believe that anymore. I mean, the field of medicine has something to offer, and health services something to offer here, but I really see that what happened when we connected childhood adversity to adult disease is that we created a great Trojan horse. Okay? Those of you who worked in the field of child abuse and neglect and trying to help child development, early childhood development, have stood at the gates of Troy in siege, trying to get inside the gates and get money and get people to pay attention. And what the ACE study did is you can wheel this thing up anywhere you want to go in the country. Okay? You can wheel it up and out, dribble ischemic heart disease and cancer and diabetes outside, and people will start to listen. And then you can draw them in to getting concerned about the traumatic stress and the suffering of children. And so, and I don't want to be negative about that. It's a great I'm going to keep using that Trojan horse, and I hope you do too. But that's really what I see the ACE study as. It's a Trojan horse. In reflecting on what the ACE study means to me is what I really see now is that what ACEs do is they destabilize relationships, family, households, and community. That's where this comes from. If we're looking for hope and love and truth and relationship, those things, if we don't get that, we get damaged. And my belief is that the genomic findings and the physiologic findings and all these other findings are really the consequences of what we need in our human nature not being met. That's what I truly believe now. So let's take a look at a few of those. ACEs cause a lot of problems. Divorce, here we have divorce, family problems where people can't get along, and sexual dissatisfaction in this graph. Some of these things probably you've never seen. They're sort of hidden away, tucked away in some of our publications. The percentage of people that have any one or all three of these problems, as the ACE score goes left to right from 0 to 4 or more, goes from 30% to almost 60%. ACEs create situations where people can't manage their finances. People report that in their households are financially unstable because they can't manage their money. They don't know that for some reason they can't do it. ACEs are related to unemployment. And, unemployment is a big issue now because of the recession, but, this is not just now. I think it's, before and in times to come. And in the blue bar is the percentage of adults who are unemployed in a recent survey. I believe this is from the state of Washington, which is one of the innovators in this area. And you see that as the ACE score goes from 0 to 4 or more, that the percentage of people unemployed goes from about 5% to 13%. And in the beige bar is people who are unable to work. And that's affected as well. So if you go to the far right, where you see ACE score of 4 or more, and you add up those two, sum those two, 25% of people with an ACE score of 4 or more are not employed. They're unemployed or unable to work. ACEs, children that grow up in high ACE families tend to live in nomadic kind of existences. Here we have residential mobility. This is from the original ACE study. People saying that they change residences 8 or more times while growing up. And as the ACE score goes from 0 to 6 or more, you see that residential mobility at that really high level goes from 5% to almost 25%. 1 in 4 children in families that have ACE scores of 6 or more will move 8 or more times while growing up. And you can imagine the destabilizing effects on relationships and other things that go on that children need to get their developmental needs met. And not surprisingly, ACEs are a pathway to homelessness. If you have family relationships that don't work, and unemployment and residential mobility, and all these other things that we've talked, alcohol and drug abuse and mental health issues, ACEs are a pathway to homelessness. This is a chart, again, gratitude to people at the Washington Family Policy Council for finding simple ways to present complex ideas that I don't present very well. This is a graph of what we call population attributable risks, which is simply the percentage of a problem that is caused, we believe is caused by childhood adversity. And this was created, this black circle is an oil slick. And this was devised at the time of the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. So the oil slick is the percentage of problems on the pie chart that we estimate are caused by childhood adversity. So let's just walk from the top around in a counterclockwise fashion. 54% of current depression, we estimate, caused by ACEs. 52% of disability days, not being able to get about your daily life and take care of yourself. Half of domestic violence, half of sexual promiscuity, almost 80% of intravenous drug abuse, 2/3 of people just simply being dissatisfied with their lives and being unhappy, 2/3 of alcoholism, half of drug abuse, almost 60% of suicide attempts, and 43% of hopelessness. We've seen the effects of lack of hope on health. So as I got on this theme of sort of unified sciences, I started Googling stuff, and I didn't know about this, but there's a unified field theory proposed by Albert Einstein in the sciences. And I don't know much about physics and math and all that, but But he proposed a unified field theory, and it's an attempt to unify the fundamental forces of physics between elementary particles into a single theoretical framework. And there's a lot of really smart people that have done the math and tried to do all this stuff, and it's yet to be proven. And what I'm proposing that the ACEs do is a unified sciences and services theory, using these simple concepts and the simple language in an attempt to unify the fundamental fields of science and service systems based on all these findings into a simple framework, not a complicated framework, a simple framework. Now, I started to read books on systems theory and systems integration, and I didn't understand it. I tried. It's too complicated for me. So I think we can keep these things simple. It's an unproven theory, but maybe that's not true, because I know that there are people out here that are already beginning to prove this theory, that you can unify these things in simple frameworks, especially when these things are applied at the community level. I'm a great believer from my experience working with the state of Washington that community-based approaches, and I see my friends from Iowa here and Minnesota, and people that are taking this out into communities, and Wisconsin. I don't want to leave anybody. I'm from the Midwest. Okay? And I see Terry Barilla there from Walla Walla. If you want to know about how this works in communities, talk to Terry Barilla. It works. So maybe it is proven already. It's just not been taken to scale. If we want to do this, we have to take a close look at what the things are that get in the way. And these are really common things, and they're tough. First is we have to overcome categorical thinking, that things happen in discrete categories and they're not overlapping. Like, for example, that one ace is here, one ace is there. Not true. Where there's one ace, there's multiple aces. Where aces pile up, there tend to be multiple problems. Okay? So getting over categorical thinking. A huge issue is categorical funding. And now what I'm beginning to see as I travel and people get together is I see people joining forces and combining their funds. I see the people from the state of Iowa are smiling there, talking about it. The Mid-Iowa Health Foundation, other people in Iowa are combining funding to get things done. They may not be large sums of money, but when you bring people together with small sums of money to do these things with a simple thing, they're making a lot happen there already. It's amazing what they've accomplished just in a couple of years. It challenges roles and identities and egos. That's tough. And system complexities. Our systems are way too complex. And it's one of the reasons that I believe that the community-based approaches can go around some of the system complexities. Okay, I told you I was going to talk a little bit about happiness. The human heart is on a quest for happiness. And this is, I've gotten in actually to reading philosophy and studying some philosophers. This is from Dr. Peter Kreeft at Boston University. And he teaches a course to students. And this is the secular concept of happiness. He polls students and looks at surveys, and these are the things that come out. That these are the things that they think brings happiness into their lives. One is wealth. Second is the conquest of nature by science and technology, freedom from pain, self-esteem, justice and peace, that is securing rights, your own rights, not necessarily the rights of others. Sex, winning wars, sports, games, and business. Honor, being accepted, loved, or understood, as opposed to the opposite of understanding, loving, and accepting others. And a long and healthy life. What for? Why do you want to live a long and healthy life? For yourself? Or for the service of others. The ancient, so I got in the ancient concept of happiness is really blessedness. And the word eudaimonia, and I'm going to show you in a minute what the etymology of that word is. Eudaimonia is a Greek word commonly translated as happiness or welfare. However, human flourishing has been proposed as a more accurate translation. Human flourishing. And this term, eudaimonia, has its origins, eu as in good, and daimon, spirit, and I believe ia is state of. And so, before the Enlightenment, you go back to ancient times, people believed that happiness was blessedness and that it was a state of being, not something to be achieved by, trying to achieve these other concepts of happiness. And so I turned to Francis of Assisi, one of my heroes, Francis of Assisi, and he said something that's along this theme of simplicity that I really like. He said, first do what is necessary, do what's necessary, then do what is possible, and before you know it, you will be doing the impossible. And I see that happening now. We're at a turning point where people are doing the necessary and possible things and dealing with the stuff that we don't know how to deal with. Do that later. We'll figure that out later. So one of the things that's necessary and possible is we need to keep measuring this. In 2009, the CDC provided questions about adverse childhood experiences and made this available to states for their statewide surveys. And about 6 states began collecting data about ACEs in 2009. More added in 2010. The initial years, there was some funding from the CDC. There's no longer CDC funding for this. So now states are getting their own funding, finding ways of getting this done on their own. More in 2011. Here's 2012, 19 states. And this is my own, this is not an official survey, this is just what I find out, but nobody's really actually administratively documenting this as far as I know. But as of this year, there's 21 states. And what I would like to do is set a goal to say that every state and territory will have measured this by 2018. That gives us 5 years. And that everybody who measures it and uses it shares their experience in using it for all the purposes they can use, what works well with this information, how you teach it, who you go to with it, who buys into it, and what works with it to get resources and funding and to use that Trojan horse. What else can we do? What's necessary and possible is we can assess the population impact of ACEs using surveys like this. There are other surveys we're going to hear about, an urban ACE survey here in Philadelphia. There are surveys being done in tribal communities. It's not necessarily statewide. You can do it in communities. And one of the first things I learned at the CDC, and I think this is generally true, is I was taught that what gets measured gets done. Now, that's not necessarily true, but if you don't measure it, it's unlikely to get done. I learned about the value of surveillance, which is what these surveys are about. If you measure these things, and in this case, if you measure the suffering of children and its consequences on populations, and you do it over and over, it keeps it on the agenda. If you do it once, people will forget about it. So if you do it periodically, you keep putting it up in front of people. And by doing it over time, you can also track to see whether things are changing. And the state of Washington has done some really innovative work because they've done these surveys over multiple years and looking at how community health relates to childhood adversity. I think this should be done nationally. I don't know why there is not a national education program around this topic. When I first raised this at CDC, Rob, you can't do that. That was 12 years ago. And that's what I still hear. You can't do that because there's not a silver bullet. You can't teach this to people until you can give people a silver bullet to do something about it. And I think that's foolish. I think we need to trust the creativity at the grassroots level, the innovation and creativity and the human capital, and people's desire to find meaning and purpose in their lives that comes from this information. That works. And I see that working as I travel around the country. And to create synergy between the general public and professionals. My belief as a public health person is that the real driver of the change in this thing as a social movement is the everyday person. That if everybody could understand this, the concepts, and speak the language, and think about their own lives and talk to their neighbors about it in synergy with professionals if they need professional help and guidance, that's going to be the real power of making this thing move. So I have this idea of building self-healing communities. And I think that's possible. And it's possible because I see that happening. I see that happening in communities that I visit. And if you look at this gear here, the biggest gear, the largest gear, is the population of people affected by ACEs. And why do I put that there? Because the number of people affected by ACEs or know somebody affected by ACEs outnumbers the people who've not been affected by ACEs. So when I see, look, why don't we raise an army? Okay? There's not enough service systems, there's not enough service providers, there's not enough resources to service our way out of this. And I'm not saying that we don't provide the needed services, because those are some of the other gears out there that need to be in place. But I think the power of getting everybody to know this information so that they can use it in their own lives, use it with their children, use it in their parenting and their neighbors and in their schools is the real power driver of this, and creating a market force where people demand better understanding of this, and if they need services, that those services will be there for them. And so you see these interacting gears here. This population needs to interact with the health services community, the education system, and I'm going to stop here for a minute. I spoke recently to Chris Blodgett, who's out in the audience, who's way out on the cutting edge of understanding how ACEs work in education systems. For a while, I had thought that our education system really should be a public health system. And when I talked to him, he affirmed that for me. But for me, it was just an idea. He's got the data. It should be a public health system, helping children affected by ACEs to stay on track and to accommodate them so that they don't end up in the justice system, which is one of the other gears. And then there's other special services, deep end services. When I talk to people, is there anybody here from Milwaukee? I thought that maybe not, but people, and what I'm hearing now when I talk to people in the deep end services is they're starting to look up out of their foxholes and say, maybe we need to prevent what we're dealing with. No, and I don't mean that negatively, because bless them, these deep end services are needed. I'm not putting down any of these other gears. But people are coming up out of these deep end things and saying, how are we going to prevent this? And I'm going to say once again that the power is going to come from the people affected by ACEs. And I think it's negative and patronizing to think that this information, that they can't use this information to empower themselves and to help each other. So self-healing communities. Now, I was asked to do something different. I did. How much time do we have? Okay, perfect. I did not partner with Disney to do this. I found a video clip in which I saw what I'm talking about here today, and it's the idea of the sorcerer's apprentice. And the definition of a sorcerer's apprentice is someone who finds a spell and tries to make objects do the cleanup work. make objects do the cleanup, not people, not relationship, but make objects, abstractions do the cleanup work. And so I'm going to, this is my narrative. I can't do it simultaneously with a video. And Sandy, when Sandy saw this, I sent it to her. I said, I want to show this clip, and I'm going to expose her a little bit. She said, do I need to make brownies for the audience before we show this? I don't know if there were brownies out there. You may need a brownie afterwards after you see this clip. But so here is my narrative. You'll see this, what I saw in this clip, and this is my narrative. Who is the conductor of the symphony of the healing forces in life? The sorcerer's apprentice calls upon the false magic of objects to manipulate, trying to get the job done. The collective demon of darkness of abuse, neglect, violence, addiction, and other childhood adversities invoke a seductive quest for meaning and happiness where it does not reside, skating on the surface of life. The sorcerer knows magic that the apprentice cannot manage. The apprentice pulls at the stars, gathering bits of information, technology, and tiny abstract pieces of the truth, as if to create a single lightning stroke of magic to fend off the darkness. And the carnage of the reptilian survival of the fittest in the battle for resources goes on under the false assumption of scarcity, one organization devouring another. I like this word. Bloated hippos of bureaucracy. But bloated hippos of bureaucracy dance in fright of change and loss of identity, twirling awkwardly, getting stuck in their own pillars of power? Or do we find the magic web of natural synergy to bring forth new mushrooms of healing for the next generation? To fend off the racing demons of violence, abuse, addiction, mental illness, family destruction, disease, and early death? The sorcerer calls a halt, knowing the apprentice will fail in the tempest of adversity. The apprentice's mops and buckets march forward using resources gathered and used as objects one at a time. Buckets of categorical thinking and categorical funding, and the resources are spilled, washing the apprentice away in a swirling waste. The banished apprentice returns to the master, tugging at his coattails, only to find the curtain closing on the symphony of healing. You ready for Fantasia? Okay. You know, haven't we all been Mickey Mouse? I have. I don't know if you ought to be you. Why don't we cut the Mickey Mouse? You know? Let's not do that again. Let's not waste all those resources. You know, manipulating objects, putting them in buckets, and throwing them around, and have bureaucracy dancing around in fear, and organizations devouring each other over those resources and their identities. In the synergy of self-healing community, I believe we can find eudaimonia, the true spirit leading to the ancient concept of happiness. Thank you for having me here this morning, and thank you for the work that you do out there. Thank you very much.